Digital transformation projects are often and increasingly seen by organisations as a fundamental component of their long-term strategy and as a way of guaranteeing the future of their organisations. They've been fated in the industry as delivering fundamental change and growth and as being essential to the ongoing viability of business models. But there's also a darker side to this utopian picture. According to research undertaken by McKinsey, 70% of digital transformation projects fail to meet their stated goals. So clearly these projects are important, and also clearly there are challenges in delivering them. But what do we mean by digital transformation? Why are these projects so complex? What are the key trends in the digital transformation landscape? And why do these projects so often fail to deliver their stated goals? Thank you for tuning in to the second in a series of webinars we'll be running on digital transformation projects, in which we look to answer these questions and many more. These webinars are designed to provide an entry point into the complex world of digital transformation, and as such we've purposely kept them short and hopefully engaging. Of course, if you'd like to discuss any of the themes arising during these webinars with any of our experts, we'd be more than happy to arrange a short conversation. The first webinar we ran examined how to get the best from your lawyers in a digital transformation project. In this webinar, we take a plunge into the murky world of technology regulation and explore the increasingly pervasive impact it's having on digital transformation projects, and indeed technology transactions generally. There was once a time, and some would argue a simpler time, when technology was a largely deregulated sector. Technology organisations were about to go their business as they pleased, with the only compliance-shaped thorn in their side being data protection. That's no longer the case. There's been a sharpened regulatory focus on the role of technology in the functioning of the economy and society at large, and a desire by regulators and governments to ensure that technology is being provided and used in line with broader policy objectives. In recent years, we've seen substantial changes to the digital regulation landscape in the EU and the UK, with the pace of adoption of new laws increasing year on year. This is a complex and fast-paced area, and one which requires real in-depth expertise and understanding of the regimes in place. Fortunately, I'm in the presence today of two people who can claim to be both complex and fast-paced. Brunning and Charley Guile, a partner and associate respectively in our market-leading technology and data team. Thank you both.
Thanks for having us.
So, John, Charley, how are you seeing digital regulation affect clients in the technology sector?
So I think it's one of the key points you picked up on in your intro, Nick. We were previously in a time where it's mainly deregulated, and we're getting to a point now where, the tech sector generally is almost a regulated sector. And of course, as you sort of mentioned and touched upon, there's a sheer amount of regulation that's coming. So whether that's stuff that we can see in the pipeline already, and we've got drafts floating, or it's, waiting for enforcement date, we've also, got things that will no doubt be coming up in the next few years. That presents a lot of issues. There is this whole host of things to get to grips with, understanding what your obligations are, but also looking at how you can have sort of a regulatory regime within your organisation. So from a digital transformation perspective as well, that's affecting both sides of the journey, so both customers and suppliers. And that depends on the angle of the regulation. We can think of something like DORA, where you might have something that is, traditionally affecting financial entities, so we're looking at the customer side, but there will of course be flow downs, specific requirements on the suppliers in those scenarios. But it could be something like the Digital Services Act, which actually looking more at the customer side of that and what they need to consider when building up their product or service.
There's also a lot talked about the fines and the sanctions that are involved in the new regulation. You talked about GDPR. That was seen as the high watermark in terms of fines of 4% of global annual turnover. That now looks relatively small compared to what regulators have in their armoury on things like the DSA or the Online Safety Act in the UK. And coupled with fines, there's also further sanctions that can be imposed by regulators. And while I think a lot of the lawyers, both in-house and externally, use that stick, let's say, as perhaps an incentive to get stakeholders in the business to really think about this compliance, I think there's a better carrot that we should be talking to the business about, and that's really around brand and sales. And we've seen that with the most successful companies using that with privacy, really putting it at the forefront of their marketing, becoming a trusted brand when it comes to compliance with GDPR. And I think exactly the same thing is going to be the case for digital regulation. It's going to make the sales process much smoother. It's going to give more comfort to customers. and ultimately drive more business for the company.
Thanks very much, both. So what have you seen other suppliers in the market doing?
Well, I think we're seeing different businesses affected by the regulations in different ways, and that depends on the sector they're in and the types of services they're providing. I think there's also a mixed bag as to the level of approach they're taking. So there's also, for some businesses, they've been aware about the regulation and doing things like that for a year or so. So some of the big banks, for example, have been thinking about DORA and putting in place processes for a while now, whereas in other cases, we're still seeing businesses still grappling as to whether they're subject to the Digital Services Act, which has been enforced for a few months already. And I think there's a few reasons why that is. The first is the sheer volume of regulation. We're seeing sort of almost tidal wave of regulation impacting a broad range of the technology sector. There's a lot of complexity there to get involved in. We're also dealing with it across the economic climate, so there's probably more of a focus on some of the commercial and growing business rather than compliance risk. I think there's also a question on where does this sit properly within a business. GDPR has created privacy teams within in-house legal functions. Should all this regulation sit within that team? Does it sit within security teams? Does it sit within the general counsel or the broader legal team? And that's because this regulation touches upon not just legal issues, but things like security and governance and operations and policies and processes and all those types of things. I said sort of in your last question about this being used as a sales technique, and I really think that's an important message that we as lawyers should be providing to the business. And some people who have done this well have been looking at, controlling the narrative when it comes to compliance with these regulations. So having white papers in place which explain their compliance regime, putting in place contractual documentation which meets the requirements.
Yeah, I just think just to echo on that, whilst the contractual commitments are useful to have, as John mentioned, there's a lot in these regulations around governance and operational changes, and we don't just want to put something on paper and not have something to back that up. But also where there is such in sometimes overlaps with these regulations or things that you might already have in place, so you might already have certain standards you're adhering to, which might go some or even majority of the way there to meet your requirements under these regulations. You still need to assess what those requirements are and understand where those gaps are. So thinking of things like some of our colleagues in the upcoming webinars will pick up on, cybersecurity and AI. But there might be other areas where you've already started to deal with, policies on or procedures to how you deal with portability of data. Could that be extended to include non-personal data, as might be required under the Data Act, for example? So that's just something, to be aware of and make sure those things are in place. But it's also why it's really important to have, wider support from your in-house legal team and external lawyers that do understand both the regulatory landscape, but also that technical and security landscape. They understand the lingo and can, help you to identify where those gaps are and what additional things and steps you need to undertake. I think just to round up on the question generally, one of the best approaches you're probably seeing is where a supplier or a customer is able to take a holistic view of the regulation. As we sort of said, there is so much coming and you could get bogged down in reading everything that's available and then starting out on, lots of different compliance exercises. And we saw with the GDPR, and sometimes it is still difficult, but you're rolling out policies and processes, which you're still trying to get businesses to adhere to. And that was just one piece of regulation. So in a way, it would be beneficial to take that holistic view of the regulation that you're subject to and set out on a one compliance sort of approach and one set of rules and roll them out at once.
Thanks, both. So lots to bear in mind. So if you had to distill it down, what would you recommend suppliers do?
I think it's quite a tricky question, and I know lots of people will be looking for that, that one big thing that tick this or complete this, and I'm part way there or all the way there. But as we have said throughout, lots of different regulations come at it from different angles. So it's not a simple case of being able to do that. But there are steps, to start doing now. Some people are further down the track with this than others. But it's sort of, a few key things. First, identify the regulations that you think you may or may not be in scope for. There probably will be a few that you have a question mark over, so you'll need to do a little bit more analysis for. And there'll be others which you think, actually straight away we know we're cool. And then you're looking at understanding what the requirements are under that and how you fit within that. And that can vary. So when you do that, scoping analysis, it's really important to understand how the regulation applies to you as well, not just at your court. And so, for example, under NIS 2, you will have potentially different requirements if you're considered an important entity or an essential entity. Same as the DSA, it's several layers, like an onion, and once you get to the inner part of that onion, you've got more requirements. So it's understanding that as well as just being in scope of the regulation. Once you understand those requirements, doing what we refer to as a gap analysis, looking at those requirements, you've said before, you may already have policies, processes, certain terms in place which help you comply with some of those requirements. And then you can easily distill, where the gaps are, what do we need to do next? And then, of course, doing that action, that remediation to get you to a stage of compliance.
And I think there's a whole prioritisation here, because there's a lot to do, as Charlie just said. And I think it's about thinking about what to do first and when. And I think if you're looking at that, you obviously need to think about those things that are perhaps fundamental to the design of the product. A lot of these regulations are touching on design aspects. And so getting that right early stops you from having to retrofit a product, or in worst case, having to start again in order to bring a compliant product to market. So I think that's kind of key. And also just looking at things which take the longest lead time. What do you need to get going now that's going to take a while to come to fruition? So I think there's definitely a prioritisation there. And that kind of follows on to just a broader project plan. This isn't just a quick win, tick a box. This is going to be a project which are going to need to involve key stakeholders across the business. We talked a bit about the types of areas of business that this impacts in order to be able to deliver a compliance programme. And finally, there's the horizon scanning aspect of this. So I think it's important to understand what's coming down the track. We aren't at the end of the journey when it comes to regulation. There's things happening the next year and longer. So, for example, NIS 2 needs to be locally implemented, so we're still waiting to see how that plays out. And a shameless plug, if you're looking to keep on top of that, we have a tech regulation mailing list, which goes out quarterly and gives people an update on what's happened across the key regulations in the last 3 months. So if you're looking for a way to stay on top of things, you can sign up to our mailing list.
Thank you so much, John and Charlie. It's crystal clear to me that digital regulation is here and here to stay, and that having people in your camp who truly understand the regulation will be invaluable for the success of projects going forward. We hope you found the webinar useful. Please do stay tuned for subsequent webinars, which will cover topics ranging from how to effectively manage AI risk in digital transformation projects, how to effectively deliver these projects in a cost-constrained economic environment, and more besides. And of course, if you'd like to discuss any of the matters we cover in these webinars with any of our experts, or if you have any questions regarding digital transformation generally, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We'd love to talk to you.